Hi, my name is Kyle, and welcome to my presentation for PYPx. Our theme for our PYPx was sharing the planet. Have you ever felt an earthquake at school and wondered if this building is strong enough? Well, for my PYPx research, I did SDG number 8, decent work in economic growth. The reason why I chose this topic is because of I saw how bad the infrastructure was in Turkey when the earthquake hit back in February. Here's another image of what happened in the Turkey-Syria earthquakes and what happened to the buildings when the earthquake hit the area. My central idea was fraud in the construction industry affects earthquake safety. I was curious to learn more about LOI number 1 was the effect of dishonesty in the construction industry, LOI number 2, how has technology improved for cities that are prone to earthquakes, and LOI number 3, how corruption and fraud works in the construction industry. LOI number 1, what is the effect of dishonesty in the construction industry? For LOI number 1's key concept, I chose form. As you can see on this page, these were the following questions. What is a soft-story building? Soft-story buildings are a type of buildings that don't have a main first floor but is only a garage or store. The buildings are usually 15 to 20-year-old buildings themselves when people first buy or rent them. What does a soft-story building look like? Some of the problems with soft-story buildings are their designs. The problems are the safety of the buildings because most soft-story buildings are outdated or new but unsafe. As you can see on the screen, this is a soft-story building from San Francisco. Its first floor has a store under the apartments, which is really dangerous if there's an earthquake. What happens to soft-story buildings after earthquakes? This is what happened to a soft-story building after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in downtown San Francisco. You can see on the bottom of the building is tilted due to the lack of strength of the bottom part. Usually, the bottom is a garage or a store like 7-Eleven. Most of the time, the bottom part is mostly damaged from the earthquake because that is the most unstable part of the building. How can soft-story buildings be improved? Here's an example of how weak one soft-story building can be. It shows that first before the earthquake happened, it's just a building in a stable place. It usually has wood columns, open walls, and a soft story. They show this on the image when an earthquake happens. The main building will fall and down and kill the people that live in the building. Then, at the last box, they're showing a solution for the soft-story buildings, like to put in reinforced walls, extra bolts and braces for the wall, and fix the columns. Another question I had is why do construction companies lie to the government about making their buildings safe? I found out a few reasons. Reason number 1, to cut costs with how much they spend. Reason number 2, to give their employees a better payroll with the money they got from cutting the costs. Reason number 3, after all of that, the CEO gets the money from cutting the cost and lying to the customer or government about the real cost and getting off scot-free about it. Reason number 4, and another reason why companies do this is to not go into debt, which can happen sometimes if companies spend a lot of money on stuff they shouldn't be spending that money on. And reason number 5, or to avoid taxes for the labor cost and building hours for the construction company's employees. A second line of inquiry is how has technology improved for buildings in earthquake-prone cities? A key concept for LOI number 2 was change. Again, I had many questions. How technology has improved for cities that are prone to earthquakes. About 20,000 earthquakes happen every year, meaning that there are 105 earthquakes every month, 55 earthquakes every day, and 33 to 35 earthquakes per hour, and 35 earthquakes per minute. This only depends on earthquakes that are 2 to 4 magnitude. How can soft-story buildings be improved? How soft-story buildings can be improved is by retrofitting. Retrofitting is where you renovate the building or house or apartment. So therefore, we can do this right, but there's only one problem with the soft-story building. The problem is with the building. Soft-story building problems. If it's for use soft-story buildings, they are usually 15 to 20-year-old buildings that haven't been renovated in the past 10 years and are out of shape and not safe in earthquakes. So society should be useful to help fix these buildings and make them earthquake-proof, thereby making the buildings safer to live in when an earthquake hits. So logically, that's what you should do if you live in the soft-story buildings. What can we help fix? What can we help fixing in soft-story buildings? The first step is to replace the poles on the bottoms to be made of steel, not concrete. There's lots of reasons why you should probably do this if you live in a soft-story complex, but the main point is steel is safer when it comes to earthquakes instead of concrete due to flexibility. Another thing to do is to renovate or remove the parking lot for safety reasons to not make the building's main core out of concrete because concrete is not safe during earthquakes due to the lack of flexibility it has. If the lack of flexibility it has, it will be more dangerous in an earthquake. Because in the future, this might help a lot if you change with steel. Another thing to do is another thing to do is to remove the part is to change the concrete or renovate the building due because if the building isn't renovated, it will not help if an earthquake happens. And once the earthquake happens, you'll basically die from the building collapsing. The last thing to do is to get rid of the bottom part and build under the building and safer and put reinforced walls that protect the residents that live in the building. So if we do this, this will save lives. How's technology been implemented to high rises? For this question, I had something to do with a lot of research about it. First, a lot of information about this is from my first idea is how can we implement technology into sky rises, and I want to know about how to do this question. Take an example from Japan, in this case the Tokyo Skytree. Tokyo Skytree is a building in Japan that right under the building there is studs made of rubber that move around strong when an earthquake hits Japan, which happens a lot. And an example is when an earthquake hits the Skytree's movement are not due to the rubber moving under the building. Another example is the Utah State Capitol building. Even if the building's 170 years old, it can resist earthquakes. And how can it be resistant to earthquakes, you might be wondering? Well, first, when they renovated the building, they changed the structure on the concrete poles and made them with steel instead for protection of a strong earthquake hit the building. Also, they made the building structure to be balanced with the other parts of the building, so they put reinforced steel around the whole side of the building. My line of inquiry number three's concept was how was responsibility. I only had two questions. How can corruption and lack of surveillance affect people can be affected the building by and the people? Why do companies get away with not building materials? Did you know 500,000 earthquakes happen every year? And the problem with these earthquakes is construction companies' building techniques, or how it's called corruption and fraud. The problem with corruption and fraud is that it costs the lives of people that live in these buildings and are not safe for the earth. I was wondering why do companies do this type of stuff and get away with it? But going into further investigations, this is a worldwide crisis, and here we can fix this worldwide problem. With my main questions for LOI number 3, which are how corruption and lack of surveillance affected by building and the people. Examples. The main problem with this question is how deep it goes down the rabbit hole. Like in example in 2019, when the city of Toronto fined one construction company 50,000 Canadian dollars for building code violations due related to the installation of fire-related doors in a commercial building. Another example of this rabbit hole is in 2019, the state of New York fined a construction company $1.2 million for violations related to the construction of a high-rise in Manhattan. The violations included a failure to provide proper means of egress, a failure to manage safely equipment, and failure to obtain proper permits. But the worst case of this fraud is what happened in Turkey in the Turkey of Syria earthquakes, where dozens of companies were caught red-handed failing to put proper building materials, making the buildings around the countries, which coincidentally ended up killing thousands of people. And see the problem, the CEO of this company can get away with this. Also, this is a national crisis in Turkey when builders lack proper materials and get away with this type of ideas. As you can see, there's a video from Vox explaining what happened and how it was a problem in the Turkey and Syria earthquakes. Same thing with the first question. This is a problem with the why do construction companies get away with not using proper building materials? Same thing with the first question. The problem and lack of proper building materials causes a lot of building collapses, and here are two famous examples. The Sampo Mall collapse. This is the most famous case with not using proper building materials. Was the Sampo Mall department store collapse in 1995. This incident happened in South Korea, killing 89 people, and this the deadliest collapse in South Korean history. The problems with this deadly collapse are corruption and not using proper materials while building the department store. The main cause of the building collapsing was something called flat slab collapse, which is when a building collapses due to have slabs of flat concrete when the building which is the most unsteady type of structural building. Here you can see on the slide that they made the pillars 200 centimeters smaller than proposed plans. The aftermath of this tragedy was all back to two guys that owned the mall, Lee Jun and his son Lee Hang Sang. They were the masterminds behind this incident that killed 89 people. As you can see, the father and son are convicted of murder in a Korean court. The father is sentenced to life in prison, while the son is sentenced to 8 years in jail in Mongolia. Another example of what happened was the Hotel New World collapse in Singapore, which killed 33 people, which is the worst building collapse in Singapore's history. What happened for this building to collapse was the lack of building codes in Singapore at the time. This was the two main causes for the building to collapse because there was a lack of proper building materials while building the hotel. The second reason is timing of the construction when they were building the hotel. They were already using a poorly designed building, which was the style of causing this building to collapse. It's because the design was only using flat concrete and metal posts, and that was it. This caused the building to collapse and kill 33 people. This was my action. Taking action, I wanted to inspire change in our world. For my action, I chose to fundraise donations for YCAB and to help rebuild schools in Cheonju, which is a type of indirect action. I did this by creating a bake sale for students to buy muffins and cookies. To promote my action, I created a colorful poster which we put up in the lobby of the school. I also promoted it by going class to class and putting a donation link on my website. By the way, this was me last week in the hospital before my bake sale. I was really excited that it actually happened. The hardest part about the bake sale was probably to count up how much cookies and muffins we should bake and sell. What I'm proud of is how much money we raised in food where we sold out of our cookies and muffins because it felt like a whole weight was lifted off of me. I thank the Endis families for my support, my aunt Iburani for making this bake sale work, and my classmates for buying and tasting the cookies and muffins. Over 2 million rupiah was made from this bake sale and was donated to YCAB. This is a great way to support SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. Together we can make a difference in the world. Audience questions? Thank you.